Hello there. This is the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka the guy who loves to tango when it comes to Django, and this video we're breaking down The Bad Batch Episode 5. The Star Wars show is now halfway through its first season, and in this video we're going to be discussing the plot, Easter eggs, hidden details, and things that you might have missed. The series so far has been a real trip through the galaxy. There's actually a lot of similarities to The Mandalorian. Not only has Omega ended up being protected by some road-weary ragtag warriors, but she now also has a bounty on her head just like Grogu that has made it so the group not only have the Empire after them, but also bounty hunters. Last week saw the arrival of Fennec Shand, who you will probably know from the aforementioned show. She really made a big entrance, and Ming-Na Wen's performance has been one of the strongest in the series thus far. Throughout the show, there's also been several characters rubbing their heads, including Wrecker at several points. Many have theorized that this means his chip is now active, and we will be discussing that theory further into the video. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Star Wars The Bad Batch Episode 5. Okay, so the episode titled Rampage is a reference to a Rancor going on, well, a rampage. Kinda wish they had smarter titles so I could sound intelligent, but luckily enough, my British accent helps to provide that anyway, so it's all good. Now we cut once more to the ship travelling through hyperspace. This is something that has been present in 3 out of the 5 episodes, and I quite like how every entry just feels like a brand new adventure as the crew head to another destination. Omega is given a comms device, and these have come in a range of formats throughout the Star Wars canon. We can see the C1 on the right here, and on the left is the comlink, which I'm not kidding was actually made from a Gillette woman's razor. Now Omega getting one of these seems like the team's doing a really nice thing for her, but going off last week, it's actually because they just want to keep her safe and stop her going off with bounty hunters. We learn that it belonged to Crosshair, and after taking what I think was his room, she's now taking his stuff too. Also, I love how we can catch Wrecker doing barbell squats with the gonk droid behind her. In Star Wars, it's been a long-running joke that no one actually knows what a gonk droid does, and this one seems to have turned into his personal weight set, as we saw him doing dumbbell curls with it earlier in the season. We discover that they're going to Ord Mantell, home of the Black Sun, who have appeared in the Star Wars expanded universe at several points. In Shadows of the Empire, the group was headed up by Prince Jizor, whose name I'm probably pronouncing wrong, but I was 6 when I played that game, and that's how I read it, and it's not changed in my head. Now the organisation appeared in several Clone Wars episodes, and also allied themselves with Darth Maul, but unfortunately they're not in this entry. Instead, the group go to meet a Jedi informant called Sid, and this might be a nod to Final Fantasy, as almost every game in the franchise featured a character called that. Now they go to Sid's bar, and shout out Simon A. Berman on Twitter for pointing out that we can see a Lothcat as well as a hammerhead alien in the location. Sid was allied with the Jedi, and she does the old Yoda trick of denying who she is when they initially meet her, but Omega sees through the disguise straight away. We've long theorized that she's Force sensitive, and is the culmination of the cloner's work. Omega typically means the end, and creating a Force sensitive clone would be the final stage of the Kaminoan's work. Now I love how you can theorize things like this, but also just see her as being far more intelligent than the other clones, and Sid takes the batch into her office. In the room, we not only see the helmet of a clone trooper, but also a Mandalorian one, and the hide of a bantha draped over her chair. Simon also spotted what might have been a Mudhorn horn on her desk, but let us know below if you think it's anything else. Sid says that since the death of the Jedi, her service demands have declined, and it shows how the Empire has affected pretty much every aspect of society. The Jedi were of course the keepers of peace in the galaxy, but since they were pretty much all wiped out, everything connected to them has destabilized too. The group bring up Fennec Shand, and Sid says she'll find out who hired her in exchange for them doing a job for her. I love how she says, "Are you fresh out the tube?" which is of course the insult that you'd use on clones instead of saying "were you born yesterday?" This is also the first time that they're referred to as mercenaries instead of soldiers. Echo questions it, but it quickly becomes apparent that it's the truth, and it lets them know they'll never be accepted into the army again and must find a way to make their way throughout the galaxy. Sid also calls Omega the brains of the operation, which could be a nod to when Dash Render called Chewbacca it when referring to how stupid Han was in Shadows of the Empire. Sid sends them to rescue a child named Muchi who was taken by Zygerian slavers. You might recognize the Zygerians from the Clone Wars, and in Star Wars lore, these feline humanoids built an entire empire off of the back of slaves. Anakin ended up working alongside one at one point, and during that he rode on the back of a Brezak, one of which appears in this episode. Now the Jedi were enemies of the Zygerian because they used slaves. However, the clone troopers themselves were very much slaves too, so it shows the hypocrisy that existed within them. Anyway, the group head off like Jango Fett, and we see Wrecker rubbing his once more. This is something that he's done throughout the series, and we also saw Crosshair doing it too. He of course is now under the control of the Empire and ready to do their bidding. I do feel that Wrecker's chip may have activated too, as they've brought a lot of attention to it. He once more hits his head in this episode, and either it's now in full effect or is completely destroyed, and it shows that they can disable Crosshairs by just smacking him in the head hard enough. Now Wrecker could potentially now be a sleeper agent amongst their ranks and be totally unaware of exactly what's going on. The motions of rubbing have been carried across in several characters. I do think that it would be a big twist if all of a sudden the Empire activated him. Omega plays with the doll that she got in the last episode, and this was a nod to the one that Jyn Erso had in Rogue One. She makes some alterations to it to make it more like the Bad Batch, which is a nice little bit of character development to show how much she admires them. At the base, the Batch believe that Muchi is one of the Faline prisoners, and they sneak into their hideout. Chizor was actually part of the Faline, which is a nice little callback to Shadows of the Empire, and potentially we could be seeing his origin story here if they decide to retcon it. Now after the Batch are caught, it's up to Omega to bust them out. The clones are called a scug by the Zygerians, and this is actually an insult that they've used at several points in Star Wars canon. They mention returning to Kadavo to get back what was taken from them, and this is a reference to their loss at the Battle of Kadavo. Season 4 episode 13 of the Clone Wars was called Escape from Kadavo, and it revolved around Obi-Wan and the clone troopers almost being enslaved by the Zygerians before they managed to escape. Now it's not too long before we discover that Muchi is actually a Rancor, and at one point we see Sid talking to a hologram in Huttese. This is Bib Fortuna, and the Rancor is for Jabba's collection. Now whilst you may assume that this is the Rancor we see in Return of the Jedi, we learn in the expanded lore that that's called Patissa, so Muchi could potentially be its mother, or again it might be a retcon. Omega frees Muchi and it goes wild, busting up most of the slavers. When the speeders chase after it, we can also hear the same sound effects that were used on them in Return of the Jedi. The Bad Batch realize that if they don't save Muchi, they won't be able to gain the intel, and thus they defeat the Brezak and Zygerian leader. However, the Rancor isn't as easy, and it's up to Wrecker to take it down. He further bangs his head in the conflict, and if this is just all leading to nothing, then I'm going to be so angry. You better not Mephisto me again. Now the Rancor is given to Bib, and he heads off back to Jabba's palace. We know from the expanded lore that one died in a crash whilst being escorted to the location, but it did go on to have an offspring. Again, whether this is retconned or not, we don't know, but I like that there's at least some tie to it. Now Sid reveals that Shand is working on direct commission and says that she contacted people in the guild. The guild of course was what the Mandalorian operated under in the show, and who knows, we might even see Greef Karga. Now it is possible that she's been hired by Boba Fett, and this would explain why she's so loyal to him. After the events of Attack of the Clones, he went on to form his own group of bounty hunters, and we know that the Mandalorian ends with him taking over Bib's operation, and hey, it's like poetry, they rhyme. Now as for my thoughts on the series, so far I think the first 5 episodes have been really solid. Whilst on the whole, I wouldn't say that they're completely knocking it out of the park each and every time, I do like the very character driven narrative that the show has been leading with. I would say that this is more of a drama that wrestles with the themes of conformity versus independence than it does with all-out action. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that the Empire are very much a metaphor for the Nazis, and one of the periods in history that I was highly fascinated with at school and uni was their rise to power. Clearly, they came in and took over, and the general population in Germany conformed to their ideas. However, there were those that resisted, and I view the Bad Batch as fitting that mold, whilst the other soldiers sort of represent the rest of the population. We've even had characters fleeing planets taken over by the Imperials, and people who could see the way that things were going in Germany too took a similar action. Though I might be reaching with this whole metaphor, I appreciate that the show sparks these kinds of things in my brain, as I think they're really interesting conversations to have. And what the show also does well is that you can probably enjoy it on its surface and not go looking for any of those illusions and still have a good time. This is also interesting because it's in a time period in Star Wars lore that we haven't really seen before. Therefore, the show exploring this does also help to make it important in Star Wars history, rather than it simply being relegated to something that's run of the mill. As I've been saying, we are at the halfway point now, and it's developing really well and connecting to the grander universe in a cohesive manner. I feel like the prequels are regarded much higher now than when they were first released because of shows like the Clone Wars, which helped to flesh out the characters and story. Bad Batch is doing the same, and though it's taking its time to get fully going, I'm still having fun with the ride. So far my interest level is probably at about a 7, but I know there's a varied amount of opinions on it. Now obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show so far, and of course this episode too. Comment below and let me know, and as a thank you for interacting with the video, you'll be entered into a prize draw on the 30th of May, in which we're giving away 3 copies of the Godzilla vs. Kong collection. All you have to do to be on the chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the episode. The winners of last month's competition are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of Army of the Dead, which will be linked on screen right now. We've gone over the unanswered questions on the film and have given our theories on them, as well as what Zack Snyder has said, so it's definitely worth checking out if you're confused over the movie. With that out of the way, thank you for sitting through the video. I've been Paul, I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.